This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week we're celebrating Christmas by bringing on Proper Horrorshow, the host of, you just told me the name of your show, Double
Feature Horror Show.
Double Feature Horror Show, which I've been on and I should know. I mean, by the time this is up, I'll have been on a second episode of this, so I look forward to seeing my not at all lucid appearance on that, but hopefully this turns out well.
You've been leading me astray, I've got to say. You know, that you've been on once before, but we have never actually discussed a horror movie. You're a bad influence on me.
What was the one we talked about when I was on your show last time?
We talked about Parasite, the South Korean Oscar winner.
True, that's not a horror movie. That's I guess if not watching horror movies makes me a bad influence. Oh, sorry about that, but yeah. So we are here for I believe this will be coming out like the day before Christmas Eve. So if this is that day for you, then Merry Christmas, whatever holiday you happen to celebrate, and happy that. And I don't want to say the Happy Holidays thing because that's too lefty for me. But we both kind of had the same thought about the idea of doing this. Is that we both kind of agreed that Christmas movies are very weird. And I just something I've been mulling over for a while. It's just this thought that there's this weird element to Christmas movies where they're pretty much impossible to criticize in a meaningful way because they're all so deeply attached to ritual that it becomes effectively impossible to have a non-biased opinion about them. And I've noticed that a lot in my life as I go back and watch ones I didn't watch as a kid. So, my big one as a kid was A Christmas Story. So I watched that every single year, and Charlie Brown Christmas is the other big one for me. But then I go and watch something like Home Alone or Jingle All the Way for the first time, and I don't have that nostalgic memory to it. And it's just this bizarre experience where I'm like, I don't get the emotional, pathways this is opening up in someone else's brain just because it hasn't been beaten into my conscience since I was a zygote. But they do seem to bring out genuine nostalgia in people, and that's weird because especially when you approach it from the outside, a lot of these movies have really weird themes and really weird ideas behind them. And the one I brought up to you as my example before when we were discussing was Polar Express, which it's not one of the ones I don't know if we both watched it, but it's weird to me because the movie just creates this huge atmosphere of you have to believe, and portrays Santa Claus with this almost Christ-like glow, and I'm like, I guess this is I guess this makes sense in a children's fairy tale sense. It's man, yeah, it's important to believe in Santa Claus, and then you watch it as an adult, and you're like, what the frick am I watching? But so I guess part of the reason why I want to do this stream is that I hope that we could kind of, work through a couple of Christmas movies and find that kind of balance between what is the proper Christmas movie epistemologically, and why is that, and why is it that way? And not that this necessarily matters, because I don't want to judge. I don't want to king shame someone's Christmas movie of choice. That's. I think it's fascinating to look at just because, the ones we pick, they're interesting. These aren't necessarily the most consumeristic ones, but they're definitely interesting in the way they relate to what the true meaning of Christmas actually is supposed to be. Which, for the sake of discussion, doesn't necessarily need to be religious in any sort of way, but when they put so much weight on just the concept of Christmas that it takes on this weird kind of vague meaning to it. What do you think of Christmas movies in general?
I think they're really interesting in the way that they typically have a different emotional vibe that you wouldn't get anywhere else, where it would be called schmaltzy, and here it's an absolute requirement. But they they strike me as very interesting, as I'm quite interested in sort of sincerity. And they seem to be always saying that, yeah, you want to believe and you want to believe really deeply and sincerely, and that's wonderful and beautiful. But it's a way of short circuiting the general ironic response that we tend to give. And a lot of movies will try and do a sort of ironic shrug around Christmas and oh what a pain it is. But they get through that, and they ultimately reveal a very genuine core about belief and community and family. And it's almost like they can't help themselves. They end up being something a bit lovely, but they have to be. How can I say? They struggle to get there sometimes. They take weird paths to get there.
Yeah, I want to throw a caveat in that, with the caveat being most of them are actually probably bad movies if you just look at them as pure film experiences. Some worse than others. And I'll say this as a definitive: the worst genre of all cinema is movies that are trying to astroturf a Christmas classic. Like, I see this all the like at least once every couple of years. Some companies like, we're gonna try to astroturf the new Christmas special, and it sucks, and we're gonna rush it out. But 50 years from now, we're gonna be rich. And so you just see this like crappy movie like Elf on a Shelf, the movie, in your frigging Walmart shelf, and like you just think like, I'm really glad that this is gonna be forgotten forever. Like, this is just gonna be sitting in a bin somewhere 15 years from now, and no one's ever gonna think about it again. But even then, like I was looking through Google right before this at the list of like recent Christmas movies that came out, and the list was kind of amusingly bad. Christmas Chronicles 1 and 2, A Merry Friggin' Christmas with Joel McHale, Bad Santa 1 and 2, Grumpy Cat's Worst Christmas. I mean, it's...
Oh, no.
You see what I mean? It's like attempts to like astroturf new Christmas movies. It's like, oh, this is not good. But
I would love to add to that list the very unfortunate. Oh gosh, it's see, I should have Wikipedia open for every movie. There was a sequel to A Street Cat Named Bob. I don't know if you've heard of this.
No, I haven't.
This is maybe a weird British thing. Okay, hang on, I've got it. So this was a heartwarming story about a homeless guy who meets a cat and adopts a cat, and that becomes a locus for basically turning things around. It's genuinely very lovely. And it was such a big hit, publishing phenomenon, that they made a sequel. And the sequel was called A Christmas Gift from Bob, and it is one of the most astroturfed things I've ever seen. Just... It would be quite interesting as an experiment to watch the two movies by each other, because they're both around Christmas, but one has a feeling of being extremely manufactured. Like, it's so incredibly artificial. Like it's this borderline parody of the original version. It's very unusual.
Oh my. But yeah,
I wouldn't recommend it, but as a pure experiment to see a sort of movie studio knowing they need to get a sequel out and wondering what the minimum viable product is.
I mean, that's not the first time that's happened. I mean, there's also Christmas Vacation 2, Jingle All the Way 2. There's now on the 5th Home Alone sequel that just dropped on Disney Plus last month. I don't know how that's a thing, but...
No.
Christmas sequels are worse than comedy sequels. Like, you get Blues Brothers 2000 and Anchorman Legend Continues, and then next to that, Jingle All the Way 2 with Larry the Cable Guy. So
it's a hard... Well, Schwarzenegger's a really hard act to follow. You can't blame Larry the Cable Guy.
I mean, sure, Schwarzenegger is a hard act to follow, which is why you just don't try and you cast Larry the Cable Guy. And then everyone who sees it at Walmart will buy a copy for some reason. So anyway, but moving back to the central conversation, there are a lot of these movies that break through. I mean, a lot of when you look back at a lot of the classic Christmas specials, they are kind of iffy. Like, I imagine trying to be an objective critic in the 1970s when like the Rankin Bass Rudolph cartoon came out, and there's no nostalgia behind it, and analyzing that, you probably tear it apart. And that was the case with a lot of old Christmas movies. I mean, Christmas Carol got absolutely ripped up and down when that came out in the 80s. I mean, other than something like Christmas Vacation, which has that like National Lampoon brand behind it. Like they don't tend to do well at first, and then they just become infinite staples that never go away. So, and I guess that's something we'll explore with at least two of the ones that are on our list. But I guess to start out, why don't we start with your suggestion in the list with Christmas in Connecticut? Because you told me you were just diving through old Christmas specials, and I'm kind of curious what your thought process on that's been.
Yeah, sure. It probably relates a lot to what you said in that, yeah, there's a massive nostalgia buy-in that probably sort of hazes our judgment, as well as sort of a seasonal need for something a bit schmaltzy. So I wanted to look at some Christmas movies that I had no nostalgia for whatsoever, that I had never even heard of. And I just got I didn't want to watch too much recent. Maybe I was just being needlessly cynical, as we'll probably get onto. So I figured I'd just go back and let's try and find some really old stuff. Let's go for some obscure stuff that never got over the nostalgia bar. And I found a couple of lists of movies about Christmas from the 1940s and 50s, including a very transparent rip-off of It's a Wonderful Life. I know I sent you the link to that. I should try and find it, but it's literally it's the year after It's a Wonderful Life comes out, and I think it's a fairy does the job and not an angel that saves a person. But I thought that was a studio working overtime to get that out, even though I gather It's a Wonderful Life was not a success initially, and found its audience later through a slightly bizarre situation. So I looked on the list, and the one that interested me was Christmas in Connecticut from 1945, and that was. It just sounded like a sort of delightful, silly scenario. I'm sure. Had you heard of that before? Because it was absolutely new to me.
I hadn't, but it was a very comfortable and familiar film, especially if you have any familiarity with the 1930s and 1940s screwball comedies. Like,
yeah.
It's very stagey, it's very talkative, it's like there's not a lot, it's mostly set in a single location. It probably was based on like a stage play or something at some point, because you can kind of tell that there wasn't like a lot of, sets to it, so they probably just shot it on a soundstage, very briskly, probably a couple weeks, but very sharp script and, very edgy concept for its time in a way. Not necessarily scandalous, but at least, it's pushing a couple buttons in funny ways.
Oh, absolutely. It was unexpectedly saucier than I had bargained on. But at the same time, it had a quite an interesting moral framework that was very clearly in place. Which did jar with me a bit. I sort of went in there expecting something sort of extremely wholesome, and it is wholesome in a way, but it's got that screwball comedy element that's a tiny bit. How can I say? I kind of thought the protagonist was awful, and that was the battle I was having the whole time. So just to lay out the plot for that, Christmas in Connecticut is basically about. A nurse wants to get a rescued World War II veteran to settle down and live the good life, but he's not going. And so, via a slightly tenuous connection, she arranges him to go and spend Christmas with a woman who writes this absolutely idyllic home on the farm. What do you call it, sort of domestic article that's very popular. So he does, and the idea is that he'll get a taste of that and think, okay, yeah, I should settle down. So that's lovely. With the slight problem in the completely unpredictable, to turn of events that the journalist is not entirely accurate. I didn't see it coming. But yes, the journalist, she makes it all up. It's an entire fiction. And so she has to sort of scramble together this completely homely, idyllic, rural homemaking life. And because it's a screwball comedy, it's tied into she's basically needing to get married. She's needing to pretend she has a baby. She has to satisfy the boss as well. That's a classic, isn't it? You've got to impress the boss. It's one of those elements that feels quite odd for a modern viewer, the idea of your boss coming round.
Well, it's a classic problem comedy where, main character has a lie, and now they have to dance, the drama comes to the fact that they have to dance around this lie because they don't want their life torn apart. And the whole joke at the beginning is like, I just bought a dress that cost, or a mink coat that cost me 6 months worth of my income, but I'm going to pay it off with my job. The next 5 minutes later, oh crap, my job is on the line. So it's not exactly high stakes. It's mostly just, is this one person, going to screw up her career or not by getting revealed for not being sincere about who she is and what she's doing with her life. But she's not detestable. She's just kind of, vain and shallow in a way. But I guess there's part of the joke is just watching someone like that, have to deal with their comeuppance. So it works, and by the end of she is like a, does end up connecting with the other characters enough that you do kind of feel for her by the end. If only just because it ends in that very, 1950s way where everyone gets married and that's the happy ending. Is it goes back to the old Aristotelian idea that there's only two endings to a story: a death or a marriage, and you definitely see that play out in the 40s. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the bonus sort of Casablanca reunion we got as well.
Yes, exactly.
That was throwing me off for a good while. It was so Sidney Greenstreet, who is in playing a far more affable character than he was in 1941's Casablanca, and a Hungarian actor who with the best will in the world, I cannot do his name, and I will not insult him by attempting it. But he played Carl in Casablanca. And he's just sort of lovely and slightly more irascible in this. He was great fun. I did get a sinking feeling when I maybe should have seen it coming, but a sinking feeling when the war veteran who's meant to be turned around to the good home life and our protagonist fall in love sort of almost instantly. I got a bit of a sinking feeling of, oh no, not this too. I really wanted him to go with the nurse.
Oops.
I wanted him to marry the nurse, and I maybe I'm a weirdo, but I couldn't see any problem with the Terry Thomas lookalike, the architect who she's actually agreed to marry. But are my expectations too low? I thought that man was lovely. He's presented as boring, but I thought that guy was sweet.
Maybe this is part of the charm of this. Is it's just an old world mindset to all these things, where the boring accountant is the boring husband. Like he has his he has his income, but he's not exciting. You want the the strong, strapping military guy who's got stories, and he's got damage, and and then there's all the elements, like you said, of like inviting your boss over, and it's clear this movie comes from a culture that's less atomized than ours. So there's a lot more interpersonal connections, and the entire drama of the film is based on the idea of that there's immense social consequences to them falling in love. Yet they do it anyway, which it ends up being the best part of the story, but. You also sense like, yeah, this woman's going to get fired the moment that any of these characters actually are honest about their feelings and honest about what's actually happening in the story.
Oh yeah, it's a wonderful comedy mechanism in that she's hoisted on her own petard. She has told everyone that she's married, and that's precisely why the military veteran is not hitting on her, is rejecting her advances.
Yeah, because she's essentially like, oh, you want to commit adultery outside of your marriage?
So wonderful use of dramatic irony. I mean, one thing that it did strike me was this movie had basically nothing to do with Christmas.
Yeah, not really. I mean, Christmas is just the story catalyst that just brings all these people into the same, room. It's like, oh, you're going to Connecticut for Christmas, and then hijinks ensue. So yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily call this a Christmas movie, but it definitely felt seasonal. So maybe this brings up the the diehard epistemology question where you debate what is or isn't a Christmas movie. But I don't know. This felt appropriately seasonal, but you're right, it's definitely not thematically about Christmas.
No, not in the least. It does make you engage a bit more emotionally because they've got that setting, but yes, ultimately it only struck me at the end that you just get the most sort of definitive turn to the camera, Merry Christmas moment.
Yeah.
Which I'm an absolute sucker for.
Oh sure, I mean, you gotta love the old screwball comedy like final line where they just scream into the camera and then the music swells and the end comes up on the screen. It's so corny. You just gotta love it.
I did wonder if I was watching the right movie when I first started, when it was submarine footage. Like, Christmas movies ain't what they used to be.
Back in my day, it was the Christmas movie unless 3 people died. I mean,
yeah, that threw me out. I did sort of check had I got the right film, and I was like, oh, okay. It's a weird entry, guys. By the way, I really recommend this movie. If anyone listening has not seen it, probably they haven't heard of it, but give it a go. It's a really sharp script. It moves things along very zippily, but it does start with a submarine, then a life raft. It's an odd entry for a Christmas film.
Now I'm gonna have to spend the next 3 weeks of my life thinking about all the harshest cold openings in the history of 1940s cinema, because I could probably think of like 3 that are even harsher than that. Just with a little bit of forethought. Like the opening of Sullivan's Travels, where it's 2 guys drowning in a river before it cuts to the main character talking about how this is what the movie he wants to make. I had to think about that, but that's it. Huh?
That's a bit brutal.
Well, have you seen Sullivan's Travels? Not that I want to go super far on that.
I haven't. No.
Oh, Preston Sturges is so good. He's like Capra if Capra was insanely cynical and angry. but he does the same kind of screwball comedies, but they're not affirming like Capra's are. They're just kind of like tear down stupid people for doing stupid things. And Sullivan's Travels is all about a film producer who thinks he wants to make a great movie about the struggle of the working class. And so he just starts traveling around the populace, trying to see if he can understand the working class, and realizes that he's a completely out-of-touch Hollywood executive and doesn't understand people at all. It's an amazing movie.
Is there a Christmas tree in it? Because I wish I'd crammed this one in. This sounds amazing.
It's not Christmassy, but it is.
Oh, alas.
Yeah, exactly. So, but a Preston Sturges movie night would be good. But I mean, the only real Christmassy thing that you could probably say about Christmas in Connecticut is just about that it's about relationships and what it means to kind of be in the same room together for Christmas and the drama that creates, which is a good lead into I guess the next movie we'll talk about, which is Christmas with the Cranks, which I had not seen up until this past week. And I was only familiar with it because JonTron made a whole video about it back in the day, and he just ripped that film up and down. But,
how dare he?
Hold on.
I ended up liking it. I really ended up liking it. I mean, possibly this is a sort of it can't be nostalgia goggles because I've never seen it before.
Yeah.
But maybe when it comes to a Christmas movie, I might drop my standards a little bit because I had a really good time with this film.
I'll agree. I had a good time with it too, but I found it amusing because as the single greatest depiction of sociopathy in the history of cinema. So, I mean, I guess offer another one of your plot summaries because this has got a good quirky pitch to it.
Yeah. So from of all people, John Grisham, we get the story of a couple who have had their daughter go away, and they decide. They don't, I think partially because on some level, they can't face Christmas without her. And they decide, actually, Christmas is too consumerist. they've been spending way too much. They spent $6,000 on Christmas last year. So they could have a really amazing time by completely skipping Christmas. Hey, that's the name of the novel for anyone playing along at home. And go on a 10-day cruise. So it's sort of the exact opposite of Christmas, out in the sun, all that. And so that's what they plan to do. They make a big deal of announcing to everyone they're not doing Christmas. And because the film has to happen, people have very strong feelings about this. Their neighbours, the workers never cared, and every single scene in the office could have been cut out. But
I mean,
minor quibble.
John Tron was right when he had that scene of the guy being like, "Oh, you're gonna skip Christmas? Go ahead, run, but we'll find you." Which is basically the whole ethos of that film. Is just this utter bizarre inability for the main characters to just be by themselves and just make, do just enough to make everyone go away and not give them trouble, and B, everyone else around them being insanely sociopathically stalkerish about the fact that they don't want to celebrate Christmas. And there's almost it's almost a brilliant satire on like this nature, on the weird consumerist all-encompassing nature of the season. But that's assuming that you're the kind of person that finds Christmas frustrating and tense. And I know a lot of people that say that the holidays are stressful and they are anxiety-inducing. You don't like the spending and the lines and having to put up all the Christmas decorations. And I think that's kind of the tension it's trying to explore, is like that is the desire to escape the stress, and especially for these characters who are suffering empty nest syndrome, and they want that escape from it. But the movie just takes it so far that it almost like comes around and becomes funny ironically, just because of how far these characters have to go to make themselves so unlikable and so maligned within the story that they by the end, like, half the neighborhood just hates these guys on principle.
You do absolutely, and you realise that the world has just bizarro logic where no one really behaves like a human. But I think you can just sort of go along with it, mostly because the film is very aware that's what it's doing. And Tim Allen and Jamie Lee Curtis are just having a great time while they're doing it. In fact, just really good performances from both of them. That really impressed me. You don't see Jamie Lee Curtis doing comedy all that often, but she's got a real gift for it.
Yeah, and this is before her kind of sort of revival, where, I mean, this would have been right after H2O, right? Like, kind of not long, when she still had like a brief career revival, but not huge.
Yeah, H2O was 1998, and oh man, I'm so glad you say it. But I'm not going to take that bait. We're going to stay on topic, because if I start talking horror, we'll
everyone
go way
knows
off.
she's the Halloween girl, so that's her career. Like, even now, when she's having like a minor career revival, like she's in Knives Out, and she's still like mostly doing Halloween movies. Like, that's just kind of her entire job. And every time she does one, someone reaches out to her and she's like, "Hey, you want to be in this random other movie that has nothing to do with that?" And like, sure. Knives Out, sure. Christmas with the Cranks, sure. I don't understand her career trajectory, but it works for her. But
she's done all sorts. She's done a little bit of action. Obviously, she started off with horror, but I think almost everyone does, don't they? If you need to get into a movie, they're probably going to be casting horror, so you might as well. Worked for Kevin Bacon, Jennifer Aniston, Brad Pitt. I mean, we can start naming and shaming their very early horror debuts, but why would we do that? Yeah, so you're right. This was just after age 20 in 1998. This is, I think, 2004, so she was still a bit active around that time, I think. I've got a feeling I might just check and see what she was up to during that time. It is slightly odd for her to be doing a movie at this time.
Yeah, but it's also right on the cusp of when Tim Allen went from a box office draw to when he became persona non grata, and which, that was slightly before, he started talking, he basically became a political activist and started, complaining about how no one wanted to hire him, which, that happened. I think Shaggy Dog had something to do with that more than anything else. But this was right on the cusp of when he stopped being a bankable comedy star, and it's amusing seeing him in this state because it's like this is still like classic '90s Tim Allen at the height of his doing whatever the Tim Allen thing was from Home Improvement. Don't know what it was, but it works.
Well, yeah, it's a nice vibe to it, and he does condemn communism outright, which is quite nice in a Christmas movie, you know. When he said that line, it's thrown in. I was like, "Did you ad lib? Did you sneak that in, Tim?" I can just feel like Jamie Lee possibly got a little riled up, but carried on because she's a pro.
I've seen his show Last Man Standing. He doesn't hold back very much. I think this is just in his like contract. I get to say one politically belligerent thing per thing I'm in, and that's just. And if you don't let me do it, then I'm not going to be in Santa Claus 4.
Yeah, I mean that's another string we could have gone with. But
oh my gosh!
So for the approach that this takes, do you think it's fair to say that maybe this takes kind of an ironic, protective, ironic layer to approach, I guess, the sort of importance of sincere connections? I mean, we don't have much of a religious theme in this, as we'll note. Although there are some interesting touches that actually stood out to me, but it was a way of almost saying, through the protective filter of irony that you have to have, yes, Christmas is kind of a hassle, but it's worth it because it brings your community together and it makes a lot of people happy, which is, not the most profound and deep message, but gosh, it's nice to hear.
I'll compare it to something like Christmas Vacation, which is probably a more cynical version of this kind of idea, which, it essentially the core essence of Christmas. Every Christmas movie ultimately comes around on the side of Christmas. You can't have a Christmas movie that's like, screw Christmas. Although I'm sure they'll come up with, there'll be some like, woke Netflix Christmas movie in the next 5 years that's like, here's all the problematic things about Christmas. But you know what? It's still good. Maybe even if you do it ironically, you still have to ultimately come around to, Christmas is good in some regard. The weird thing about the movie for this one and in this and probably to some degree in, Christmas Vacation is that the idea of Christmas is just the consumerist ritual of Christmas. Not so much that Christmas is a time when, you have family obligations and you have, there's some sort of ulterior meaning to what's happening. It's the movie. The movie is so focused on the arbitrariness of the ritual that it doesn't. But it doesn't ultimately refute that. By the end of the film, halfway through the big plot twist halfway through the movie is that the daughter decides to come back for Christmas with her husband. And now they have to basically, cancel their huge $3,000 vacation and basically build Christmas up in like one day so that they can still have their normal Christmas party like normal, even though they've now alienated everyone they know. And that ends up being like the whole dramatic back half of the film. And the version it ultimately brings back is, one where, it might have been interesting had they not been able to get their, stuff back, but her daughter still comes home and they still celebrate Christmas without all the consumer stuff that they need to make it happen. It's like, we have to get we have to put the Frosty up. We have to get our, annual Christmas ham. We have to put all our decorations up. We need a brand new living tree. Like they immediately when they realize Christmas has to happen, they snap right back into consumer mode, and they immediately go back to what it was. And really, and even the movie's like, heartwarming ending where the entire neighborhood comes together and they help fix the Cranks Christmas by one person donates an extra tree, one person donates a turkey. Like it's heartwarming, but it's still ultimately affirming of this very ritualistic version of Christmas that isn't that, it feels like a kind of empty in hindsight, especially nowadays when it's, it's very easy to criticize consumerism.
Like I very much agree with you on that. It is interesting that it gets to the heart of it, but it does very much seem to say, but you have to do the consumerist stuff as well, because you can very easily imagine. It's almost like you were writing the alternative script then. The idea that actually they don't get it together. They've annoyed so many people, and it's a comedy of errors that they can't throw Christmas together at the last minute. But you know what? Gosh darn it. It's really, Christmas is just about them being together. And as long as they have family, they've got it. Oh, so heartwarming. You could see that movie getting made. Now, this did not do that at all, but you could see that script happening.
Or at the very least, tone down the last 20 minutes where it's just them, rebuilding the Christmas party back to its original glory, and like, maybe have like one scene where like, the house is empty and the house is in ruins, but they're all together, and all of a sudden the neighbors come out and they basically like reenact the scene from The Grinch Stole Christmas, and they, every one of them brings them a gift, and they just have this like nice little heartwarming 5 minutes together, and then everything goes back to normal, and the neighbors forgive them, and it doesn't have to be as gratuitous as it ends up being. It feels like they kind of need to do a, Christmas is the people around you, not the things you do kind of moral. And I think that probably would have gotten to the core of what those characters are, frustrated by. They don't like the consumer side of the season, which, fair. It's an overly consumered holiday, but they just don't pull the trigger on it all the way. And maybe it's because it's a, big budget blockbuster and they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, but
yeah, it's not really a message that you can put out, that you can just skip everything. In a way, I thought it did kind of a good job of saying that actually the spending does go to good places in some instances. And there was something I really loved in this. They are clearly churchgoers. They know their local priest, which was, conveniently delivered via the means of them being discovered in skimpy bathing costumes. A very basic scene, but I thought they sold it. And Jamie Lee Curtis, by the way, sorry, I never learn character names. They never sit in my head, and I will often say the protagonist or the antagonist, and I'll just remember the role they played in the movie, but I never take character names in.
I only remember their last name because it's in the title, so I don't blame you.
Yeah. Yeah. We also saw that she's an active volunteer, which was just kind of lovely and understated. But it, as you say, it makes it kind of weird that everyone just completely turns on them instantly and think they're horrible, even though we know she's church-going, she's volunteering at a couple of organizations. They're just like, no Frosty the Snowman on your roof? You are dead to me.
Well, I must say that Dan Aykroyd sells the heck out of his role as the sociopathic neighbor that absolutely must have, every house in the neighborhood has to have Frosty the Snowman on top of the house. Which, that's a great symbol for like every problem I have with this movie. Is like, what the heck? What kind of neighborhood puts up a giant Frosty thing on every house? Like, of all the things, why Frosty? He's not even the most interesting Christmas thing. Like, okay, maybe a giant Santa hat. Okay, that makes sense. Everyone loves Santa. But, who the heck puts up a Frosty the Snowman hat? It's a cartoon from the 70s. It's a cute one, but it is not like the maybe that's just what the studio owned. Like, oh, we have the rights to Frosty the Snowman. We can afford to have, 50 giant Frosties made for this film, and it won't cost us anything for the rights. And, like, but it's just, like, it's the most arbitrary thing in the movie, but it, like, causes all this tension.
The film is mostly made of arbitrary tension, but to be honest, there's so much goodwill in it that I was just rolling with everything, even though most of it made no sense.
Oh, yeah.
Or in terms of like a blast from the past, which I found Dan Aykroyd to be, welcome, that it's just like, oh gosh, wow, what are you doing, man?
It's certainly better to modern Dan Aykroyd, who's pro-cancel culture for some reason. But yeah,
alas.
We lost him, boys. He's gone. I'm sorry.
The kid from Malcolm in the Middle. With
Yeah, I saw
him
that.
turning, it was just like, Dewey? What are you doing, man? That was amazing.
I bet his parents thought this was going to be his breakout role. In like, oh, he's going to be in a movie from the guy who directed Harry Potter. This is going to be his breakout, man. He's going to be like in a Scorsese film next or something. He's going to be huge. Oops. Oh man.
Yeah, it was. It had the feeling of one of those like very of the moment castings. Like, this person's big, get them in now.
Yeah. Like that kid from Stranger Things who just appears in like every kid movie nowadays.
Finn Wolfhard. Yeah. Find something for him to do. I don't mind, but there's another one from that who's done a fair bit more, but she's been quite good. Sadie Sink. They're trying to cast her in a lot more of these sort of, how could you say, very strong woman roles. And they really did that in the Fear Street trilogy, but she was pretty darn good in it. But it has felt like she's been crammed in, but it's a bit more welcome than Finn Wolfhard, I'd say. Sorry, it took us on a weird tangent there.
No, it's okay.
You mentioned a reference to I think, was he the producer or did he also direct Christopher Columbus? Did he do both?
I think he directed, because it feels like a Christopher Columbus movie. If there's such a thing as a feeling to his movies, like this high sentimentality and melodrama, like you see it in like Harry Potter, you see it in Home Alone, like you can kind of tell when he's involved in the project in some regard, because there's like a weird wholesomeness to it, but everything is very heightened. And
yeah, absolutely. So he wrote it and he produced it. I used to think it was sort of desperate that you'd see on posters from the producers of a film, not written by or from the director of. Really?
That's a
you really notice actually producers get their marks over everything.
I mean, yeah, it's a clout thing. I mean, producers are, they're the ones in charge of the production, so they if they have a big enough name, they can sell a film. But a lot of the times, it's just desperate marketing. Is like, this horror film from the producer of Sinister. I'm like, that doesn't sound very promising right there. Not the director of the movie, not the writer. But yeah,
I think with that they've really got the brand. It's the Blumhouse horror. It's sort of, what you're getting.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So coming to the big question, is this your favourite Jake Busey performance? Because unexpectedly wholesome Jake Busey is a pretty good Jake Busey.
Which character was he? I didn't.
He was a cop. He's one of the cops teamed up with Cheech Marin in one of the weirdest bit of castings I've seen.
Oh my gosh, that's like Adam Sandler level casting right there. Like, what the heck?
The film's casting is utterly bizarre. Like, Dan Aykroyd, he makes sense, but then Jake Busey, Cheech Marin, the kid from Malcolm in the Middle, and then some high class with Emmett Walsh as one of the older neighbors. It's very bizarre casting.
Yeah, I mean, I can't begin to understand what the thought process behind this movie was, other than, let's make a big budget Christmas movie with all the talent we can afford, and I really couldn't tell you. That's a really weird set of casting. All things considered, I didn't even notice it was Jake. Good lord.
Yeah, it was a delightful surprise. I found. In terms of the Chris Columbus touch, like, one of the weirder things is just that absolute abandonment of reality at the end.
At the end, the whole thing.
Well, okay. I mean,
who walks around their office saying, "I'm not celebrating Christmas. Please don't acknowledge this."
Just so you know, guys.
Not celebrating Christmas. Not celebrating Christmas. Not celebrating Christmas. This is like something like like someone with Asperger's does. Like this is like who thinks like that? Like what is the like? I get it that it's important to set up that as because it's the drama of the film is like, oh, this guy he's so belligerent about his anti-Christmas fatwa that he will not even put the most minimal amount of effort to make his neighbors happy. Because at every point in this movie, he could have just been like, okay, my neighbors can go downstairs and get the frigging something frosty, and then I'll ignore it and not have anything to do with it. He could have been that guy, but he didn't. The whole movie is based on the fact that the dad just is absolutely unwilling to even toy with the idea of Christmas, and it's funny. It's incredibly melodramatic, but it is like at every point you could say this movie would not function as the movie it is if this guy had any sense of humanity or reason in him. Like he is just the most belligerent guy.
Yeah, they found themselves in a corner a bit. Like they did have to exaggerate everyone so people don't behave like humans do. But they I think to move it on, they did need to have Jamie Lee Curtis convinced of the plan and on board with the cruise, and then depending on which scene you're in, totally flipping on that. So that they could have the drama, which was sort of an interesting one, but I don't think we're meant to interrogate it all that much.
No, and and the funny thing is, I bet I put up that poll last week. What movie was the one that destroyed Tim Allen's career? And someone actually got really upset that I threw this movie in the list. Like Christmas with the Cranks. That movie's a classic. I'm like, okay, I guess I found the guy for whom this is a nostalgic Christmas movie. But I don't know. It's like we were saying before. You can't. It's impossible to go too critical on these movies because there's always going to be that guy who this is their favorite Christmas movie, completely illogically and nostalgically, but it is just the one movie that they value more than any other Christmas movie, and they put it in every single year. And their DVD disc is like covered in mulch and grime, and it barely plays, but they make it work. Darn it. That is their copy of that movie, and they've had it for 20 years, and they're going to have it until they're dead. Like it's like this, you can't argue with that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
It may be, which I'd find weird for this one because it does have a really big feel of just throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Like so much could just be excised completely, as it has no bearing on the rest of the film. So I'm thinking particularly of the scene where Tim Allen has had Botox.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenes that just go nowhere. Like I don't know what that was about, but
the tan they have this weird tanning thing, and it goes absolutely nowhere. But it's fun. The Botox is never mentioned again.
Well,
in some other life, it could have just been a bonus scene on the DVD that was excised for time. I did feel they were sort of trying to stretch it out a bit, that stuff. Well, because they did only get to 98 minutes.
I think that they legitimately had to kind of come up with a story once they had their premise. So a lot of the scenes up until the daughter comes back are, filler scenes like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And then even when the daughter comes back, it feels like it's kind of a rushed idea, but it's absolutely necessary to kind of, put some dramatic stakes back into this after those characters have gone that far. So it is kind of meandering and not necessarily super thought through, but it's again I will not hold it against that guy for whom this is their favorite Christmas movie. It is freaking goofy, and I perversely enjoyed watching it for what it was worth.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that guy either. I thought it would be a bit of a trash watch. I had a really good time. Maybe if you showed me this movie in June, I'd be there sort of pulling my hair out and checking my watch, but I guess it's the right time of year, and I'll give a pass to anything that's got a bit of tinsel in it.
Well, that raises the interesting question: are Christmas movies even good outside of Christmas time? Because people think you're weird if you watch Christmas movies out and it's not Christmas time. Like you are digging yourself into a deep hole by doing that.
That would be weird, actually. Yeah, I've never thought of it.
Like I said, most of these movies aren't, even the good Christmas movies are iffy movies just by themselves, with a solid handful of clear exceptions, but they work within the context that it is a ritual, that it is something. This is the Christmas thing you do. You put up the tree, you put up the lights, you watch Muppet Christmas Carol or whatever what your one is. So it is just your thing. So
you've got me wondering, like, this thing. I think you're right that there are these sort of totems, these bits of ritual that they have to write. You can almost picture the screenwriter sitting there with post-its, and they're like the pre-written ones, big Christmas tree decoration, slow motion people sitting around it unwrapping the presents, heartwarming moment, struggle over the present, big dinner, crikey, right, now I just need to get to those scenes and I'm okay. Then I'm on the home straight. Nothing really matters once we got there. I almost wonder, like, the idea of them sitting around watching Muppet Christmas Carol. Are there going to be scenes years down the road where you have the film where they watch that film where they're watching Muppet Christmas Carol?
It'll be like a Muppet movie where they're watching Muppet Christmas Carol in the background as their nostalgia Christmas scene.
Oh, we could have done that one as well, but I know I'm going to watch it soon anyway.
That's a good movie, though. It's like no one's going
to. It is. I thought I'd risk it, but I thought you were going to throw me a trash movie, and I really enjoyed Christmas with the Cranks. So,
all right, I guess moving on to the last of the totems, or the two totems we're watching. Another Christopher Columbus movie, Home Alone, which I did not watch until about 3 or 4 years ago. So I had no childhood nostalgia for this movie whatsoever when I first watched it. And I watched it, I think I just watched it for a second time like a week ago. And I will say, it is a pretty decent film by itself. But it is also probably the most nostalgia-filled movie, like, in terms of the way people react about it, that I've seen when it comes to a lot of these Christmas movies. Like, it's really cute. There's a lot of really clever gags, and there were at least 2 jokes in it that made me laugh really, really hard. But this movie feels like a annoying kids movie with a really bad lead performance, and most of the actual drama is caused by, well, it's not necessarily false drama, because they the whole premise of the movie is we left this kid 5,000 miles away at home and no one's around to check on him. So we have, the mom's trying desperately to fly back from France and get back to her in time, and most of it's just kind of started by the kids fighting and everyone's bickering on Christmas, and so it's not like the movie has bad chops to start out with, and it's got a solid premise to work from, but it's also definitely one of those movies where the nostalgia factor is off the charts for it. So I don't want to openly defame it. So what's your history with this particular film?
I come to it with all the nostalgic baggage of having watched it when it first came out, and I think there may even be a dusty VHS of it somewhere back in my parents' home. Much loved, well worn. But I rewatched it very recently. I think it was, apart from this, about 2 years ago, we just watched it and then rewatched the sequel, which is just a remake.
With Donald Trump.
Quite bizarre. Yeah, it's just a remake. But I ended up really liking it, and there are a lot of kid touches, and we probably do grant Macaulay Culkin's performance a heck of a lot of leeway, but it had a strong structure, very, very relatable premise. That idea of, you're a kid and you've got the house to yourself, but the adult world it's exciting but a bit weird. And then also the schlepping around travel, very relatable. And so that gave a good foundation for connecting to the film.
I mean, if we had to draw a clear through line through all the 3 films that we picked, not even intentionally, just kind of the way it turned out, it's the way people feel alienated around Christmas and how the like complex relationships tend to like make the holiday, more stressful than usual. Because the whole premise is, Macaulay's character is extreme, not necessarily the rowdy child, but he's the one but he's feeling really alienated in the holidays. So he's like, I'm not gonna. I hope all my parents go away forever so I can be myself. And he gets his wish. He gets to be home alone, and he has to deal with the consequences of that. And he ultimately comes to the decision that he really wants his family back. And obviously, that's not exactly what's happening. It's not like there's a literal, he didn't get. It's not big. He didn't wish his family away. It's just a misunderstanding, and the family is going to eventually come back to him, and just in time for him to learn the lesson he should have learned to begin with. So, I mean, but the movie just kind of has this like core of, it's kind of like Christmas with the Cranks. They're both movies about wanting to be distanced from people during the holidays, and to not have to deal with other people at the time when people are most stressed out.
Oh, that's definitely in there. I mean, I'd say there's another through line as well in that the idea that in a way there's a threat. The antagonist in these movies is about the high standards of the ideal Christmas. And it's weird that these films, to try and cash in a couple of $10 academic words, both reify and problematize the ideal, perfect Christmas. It's there as something that people want to achieve but are stressed out by because they feel it's beyond them. But then ultimately tend to experience in these movies, in Christmas in Connecticut, she does get to a really wholesome Christmas and doubles her salary after having lied all film. I'm not bitter. I just bugged me. In the Cranks, they reject that big spendy Christmas, and then they ultimately do it. And in Home Alone, they do have a bit of a blowout in the end. But yeah, there's this idea of we want the ideal Christmas, but we're flawed, and we don't think we can live up to it. Just got some real sort of interesting subtext for a lot of things about trying to live up to standards, trying to approach things sincerely. And I thought Home Alone had sort of the strongest bones of vulnerability and sincerity in it. I mean, we sort of skipped over the fact that this is a prequel to Saw and features extended torture sequences.
I mean, doesn't that go without saying at this point? I mean, this is the movie that's famous for being the wacky hijinks movie where the kid creates all these death traps and nearly kills two adult men by all rights should be dead by the end of the film. So,
scary homeless people should be approached as friends. Don't worry, guys. He's legit. Sorry.
The threat that most kind of hit me this time when I watched it was the threat of the old man that lives next door. That's kind of going through his own. He's basically going through the same story arc as Macaulay's character. It's, he's old man. He's alienated from his family because he doesn't get along with his son anymore. So now he only gets to see his granddaughter at her concerts, and he has to learn to be willing to take a risk and actually approach them and say that he needs them, that he wants them around, and he wants to work through the problems that keep them from being together. And I thought his was probably the most quietly powerful thing that I saw this round, just because it's such an understated little thing happening in the background, even though he's just a scary guy that's creeping out Macaulay's character, and he doesn't know how to deal with him. And the more emotionally vulnerable he becomes, the more open he is to actually reaching out to this guy. I think that really connects to the thing I was going at, the thread that was popping up to me with just being in the the connections between people and what Christmas ought to be. But I guess that kind of cuts into what I mean. If what Christmas ought to be in these kinds of movies, I mean, if we kind of have this unresolvable tension at the core of so many of these Christmas movies of the ideal Christmas. You see it in Christmas Vacation. You see it in Jingle All the Way. You see it in I guess to some degree in A Christmas Story. there is the question is what the heck is the ideal Christmas and why why is every single movie going after it? And to the point where they all acknowledge it has to be a thing, but that it's almost impossible to make it a thing. Like it's a really weird tension that they never seem to, it never fully erupts into something and like creates a downer ending, because you can't do that in this genre, but it's just something that's constantly there.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure. It's almost like a lot of that stuff is just iconography that's there in the genre, and if you take it out, is it of the genre? People have talked about this in line with George R. R. Martin, like try and deconstruct the fantasy, and there's only so much you can deconstruct before your fantasy story can't go anywhere. And why didn't you just write this about Kevin from Accounts? Because you're determined not to tell the fantasy story. So there's certain elements of that there are things we almost have to do with Christmas. Although we may yet get the full deconstructed anti-Christmas movie, it could happen.
I will throw as a potential candidate for that, because one of this might be a good transition into Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas. Which, did you end up rewatching that for this, or?
I didn't manage to do that. Can I just mention one thing about Home Alone that struck me? That this is the one that engaged most closely with Christianity. In the most tentative way and in an interesting way. There's a close-up of the nativity scene. Kevin actually makes his connection with the old man in the church. And there's the what's the hymn? I can hear it, I can't remember the title. It's Fall on Your Knees, Hear the Angels' Voices. What's the I can't remember the title. It's that one. It's nice that it did actually engage with that. Even that still stands out to me even now, that it was just nice that they had that, and that the really vulnerable human connection happened in a church. I thought that was a bit lovely.
I mean, as much as I would personally like all these movies to end with the final speech from Charlie Brown Christmas, like I do recognize we are making something that's somewhat, atomized and not necessarily. It needs to apply to a broad culture for whom Christmas is not just a religious ceremony. So I'm willing to say that, like, okay, these movies can not necessarily have to deal with the religious subject, although I do appreciate that, but it needs to do something else. And most of them just don't have the chops to do that. They just kind of circle around the iconography of Christmas and they add some sort of like attempt at metaphor about the belief in the season, or the struggle of actually living up to it. But I mean, that brings me to Abed's Uncontrollable Christmas, because I think that's the exact opposite of something like you see in Charlie Brown Christmas, where instead of saying there is a true meaning of Christmas, it's saying there is no true meaning. The meaning is exactly what we want it to be. We're going to go full moral relativity, full postmodern, and honestly, it's one of the funniest things I've watched in the past month. If postmodernity ever needed an advocate, Community is a pretty good advocate in that regard. So I won't hold that against the special, but it is probably the most not helpful in this regard in terms of like the actual themes of the special relative to everything else we watched. But I find it one of the most compulsively watchable Christmas specials ever.
Yeah, as you say, very postmodern. It's got the form of something, but it is a deconstruction, and it's quite an achievement to be able to do open, cynical deconstruction of tropes, and then still land you with a heartfelt bit of genuine emotion from the most sort of unlikely combination of Pierce at the end. Almost inevitably would be Pierce de-grinching himself.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much. Pierce is such an awful character, but he's somehow ends up being the most loyal one on Christmas somehow. And I just watched it the other night, and I was actually kind of, obviously the two big things thematically are the ending, but the other big one is just all the characters kind of discussing how complicated Christmas is when you're not necessarily of the traditional Christmas celebrating demographic, however we want to say that, being like, because all the characters are either, one of them's Jewish, one of them's a Jehovah's Witness, one of them just doesn't care about anything because he's so blasé and modern that he just doesn't care about sentimentality at all. So Christmas is just kind of pointless for him. And then of course you have the one character who's extremely Christian, so she's happy to jump on the bandwagon of being judgy and pushing her beliefs on everyone else as things go. But it a lot of what I got in this last rewatch was just watching them kind of grapple with the fact that Christmas isn't necessarily something that belongs to them, but it still means something, and they just can't quite parse it out because they all have very complicated feelings about it. I mean, there's the great Allison and Annie, I think Allison Brie's character. She says my mom's Jewish, my dad's Episcopalian, so my house as a child was just a minefield of rituals that did not coexist very well. But but she still has this weird, warm nostalgia for it, even though she knows that it doesn't make any sense with the two cultures that clashed in her life. So she just kind of has this very complicated feeling. I mean, I love this thing, but I don't understand it. And I like how the end of it is they've so even the most they've so deconstructed it, but they all still realize that the thing itself is something greater than the sum of its parts, even if you do take it from a pure postmodern perspective. So even the freaking PC principal just gets up and says, I'm tired of this. Merry Christmas! Am I allowed to say that? Am I allowed to?
Yeah, that's true. You're very limited in your deconstruction because you'll ultimately have to deconstruct via rational means. And Christmas is a wonderful realm of feelings and schmaltziness. And in a way, it's special because it's special is kind of inescapable. It's almost axiomatic. We can't deconstruct that. And if you've grown up with that, it's just part of you, which I think Abbott's Uncontrollable Christmas does get to.
Sorry, my phone's going
and
off right now.
Yeah, oh, sorry, friend.
I'm not trying to cut you off. My phone just started screaming at me.
But I think that's a really interesting thing that we have got this sort of dilemma of we have the iconography, and we've done a lot of deconstruction, and we're all, deconstruction aside, we're coming from very different places, and in a modern age, just to take one example, even leaving spirituality aside, there's a big problem in that Christmas as a celebration with a bit of abundance is sort of hard to do in a time of abundance. And all these things make it kind of difficult. So we do find ourselves in a place where we deeply feel Christmas is special, and we're trying to grasp at what that is and why. And it is a bit of a challenge. I see with a film, you can put a fun narrative to it to get yourself to the lovely iconic ending that we know we want to do. But I notice in Christmas songs now, I'm not the most up to date with modern music, but occasionally Christmas music comes on, and I play myself a little game of try and work out why Christmas is special from listening to the Christmas song. And you just notice a lot of them will say, it's that special time of year. And I'm like, yes, go on. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Groundhog Day is a special time of year. I can tell you what happens on it. Go on.
Bill Murray gets trapped in a town in Pennsylvania and he can't escape.
Yeah, it's a weird dilemma, isn't it?
Well, that would be funny if they did an IRL, what's it called? An interactive game where it's just, Bill Murray actually, it's just a movie about Bill Murray actually being in a small town in Pennsylvania and now he can't get out. That'd be a bit too meta, but I'd be all for it because we need more meta Bill Murray. But
I could go for that. I could go for that, definitely.
But yeah, even if you take the full Christmas has to be the spirituality side of it. Even then, it's still not a little problematic because we still put too much. Because if you look at it purely from the religious side of things, Christmas is not the core of the calendar. If you look at the traditional calendar, Easter and Pentecost are the spiritual,
Mm.
center of the year, and yet Christmas just holds is just the anchor for the rest of the year. So instead of having the solemn days as the heart of the year, the entire world puts up the feast day, the fun day, the gift day, the day the gift day where you get lots of things day. So it's almost like, I don't want to say there's like a artificiality to it, because I know that's that. I don't want to be the guy that says Christmas was created by Coca-Cola in 1955. Like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that jerk, because I do agree that it means something, and it is that it really does kind of, there's something beyond the veil here that is worth chasing, but no one seems to quite know what it is, so we all just kind of like allude to it, and we all just kind of implicitly know what it means, but we can't put words to it, and it makes it, and that result is that you get, lots of saccharine stuff and lots of really incoherent allusions to things, believe, and that's not to ruin the season, because I'm as we speak, I'm probably whatever I'm doing as of the time that this actually premieres, I'll probably be just watching Hallmark movies for the foreseeable Christmas break. But I'm not going to be a judge about this. But I wish we had like an epistemological center to all this. Just it'd be easier if we all could agree on what is the core that we're actually trying to dig at.
Probably the same thing the movies all come down to. We need each other. And a lot of it is these movies have just iconographic dressing to get us into a room and to sort of put the other stuff aside and say, hey, you're important to me, and we should spend time together. That's what a lot of them get to. Again, in Home Alone, he goes to a church, and for various storytelling reasons, the solution he finds in church is another human. And maybe that's part of why they work so well, is they do remind us of something very core, that for all the nonsense going round, I'm sounding schmaltzy here, but we need each other, and we do matter, and we could actually have much better, stronger communities if we reached out all year round the way we will at Christmas. I say this, and I've been putting off inviting people around for mince pies and mulled wine for about 3 weeks now, because it involves talking to people. So I'm maybe not the best example of this.
Well, there you go. I mean, virtues are always something you have to grasp for, and like you said, these are roundabout ways to get to that idea. Like, all these movies are just roundabout, characters. They know the thing means something, but they for whether it be Christmas is expensive, my finances are in a pit, or my family is 5,000 miles away from me. They all do ultimately come down on the right moral. It's just the path is where these movies stray, and it's fascinating to kind of watch that, especially if you just take it as pure cinema without the schmaltz.
Yeah.
But yeah, I need to wrap up on my end. Do you want to just plug all your stuff real quick?
Yeah, sure. So if this is going out on the 23rd, I have probably just released the Christmas special that I spent way too long on. I got props for. I sort of hate myself for getting props for a video, but I can feel the sort of Channel Awesome Doug Walker energy taking me over, and I don't like it. We've already done musical bits, it's not looking good.
Sell out.
Yeah, so that is, that should be out now. That is on the 2021 Candyman sequel, which I feel is an absolute travesty and drumming down of my favourite horror movie of all time, which is the 1992 Candyman. So if people want to hear me talk in rather excessive depth about horror movies and why one works and the other doesn't, maybe they can check it out. Hopefully they'll enjoy it.
Yeah, and at some point, I don't know when you're going to release the Scream episode, but that's the one I'm supposed to be on. So I will be on your channel too. So
that should already have come out. So by the time people in the future are listening to this, so that should have come out. So yeah, if people have enjoyed that, hopefully they watched the cover. I mean, we're doing the whole Scream series. I figured they each warrant an episode.
I promise I will be drunk during the recording, but unfortunately it's going to be 7:30 in the morning and on a work day, so I can't make that promise. At least not, on camera. So, but yeah, I look forward. I appreciate everyone that takes the time to watch this. I'm sure all of you are busy for Christmas, so I'm hoping you're just enjoying this in the background or whatever you're doing. That's super important, and I appreciate you, Proper Horror Show, for coming back on again, or coming on for the first time and talking to you. This is my our second time talking, but this is the first time you're on my channel, so I appreciate that.
That's an absolute pleasure. I thought you had a really interesting topic, and I was really excited to talk about it. So, yeah, you're very welcome.
Great. Have a Merry Christmas then.
A Merry Christmas to you too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.